Dyer today.
Yeah.
Please welcome Jay Dyer. Jay, how are you?
What's up, dude? So glad to be back. Yeah, it's one of my favorite podcasts to come on, honestly, because like it's high tier topics and we get to cut up and be funny. That's the perfect balance, bro.
Thank you, dude. Well, we love having you on. You always have an open door for anything and everything you want to talk about. For those who don't know about your numerous appearances on the show, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and where our listeners can find you?
Yeah, I cover everything from Hollywood, movie symbolism, esoteric stuff, and film. I'm working on Esoteric Hollywood 3 right now. I got 300 pages of that written. Should be out in the next few months. We also do, as Sam said, a lot of debates. It's actually popped off with debating Muslims way more so than I expected in the last few years. We've done multiple Muslim debates. We had a huge one on Fresh and Fit about a month ago. I do, as you said, the fourth hour of the Alex Jones show every Friday. Done that for 4 years. So, yeah, that's what I do. You can find me at jaysanalysis.com. You can find me my website. You can find me on InfoWars. You can find me on Twitter and all those other things, YouTube under my name.
So you seem to be like having your foot in a bunch of different, genres, let's say. You're into conspiracies. You're also into religion. You're also into the history of religion. And it just seems like all those things are popping off right now. From just things that conspiracy theorists have been talking forever about, all seem to be coming true. And then all these kind of like Abrahamic apocalyptic prophecies seem to be lining up as well. What are your thoughts on like where we're hurling towards right now?
It's weird too because like 8-10 years ago, I didn't know a whole lot about Islam. I've read about Islamic geopolitics, but I didn't know the religion, the different sects, and the different groups and their different beliefs. I just knew about CIA, British intelligence operations in these countries, which I think is still very relevant to this stuff. But it's weird because I just kind of got deep into Shia stuff. And of course, that's what, Nasrallah, Hezbollah, Iran, that's Shia Islam. It's its own weird, sort of unique Neoplatonic esoteric version of Islam, which is very strange. And the way that contrasts with rabbinic Judaism, the establishment of the state of Israel. I mean, it's just a whole like mega rabbit hole that it's crazy. I don't even know how to describe it, but I think that it is a spiritual thing on one level, but also you've got this geopolitical machinations, things going on in the background. I did a deep dive on a lot of Mossad stuff fairly recently. So, I mean, there's just so many levels and layers to this. I wouldn't even know where to begin. But from a spiritual vantage point, I would say I don't know if it's the end of the world, but it definitely might be a mini kind of apocalyptic scenario if it escalates.
Now, let me ask you something. So as somebody who is a devout Catholic and Orthodox can't you're not
No.
Catholic. You're Orthodox. Okay. Yeah, my buddy
That's all right.
Giovanni Vuk is a huge fan, and we do this thing where we listen to Johnny Cash read the Bible and we discuss it. If you ever have a moment, we'd love for you to jump on. Um as you see kind of this thing going on between Israel, all of these neighboring countries, and we have the whole thing with Christianity and the prophecies and all that. Does the actions of Israel affect your view on any of this, or is this lining up with how you see it's supposed to play out?
Only in a kind of minor way. I mean, we don't, as Orthodox Christians, really accept anything to do with like an atheistic secular Zionist state as if that's like some kind of, it could be something developing into something prophetic. But typically we're very reserved about end time speculations. We know there will be an antichrist. We know that it will probably in some way relate to a third temple and the state of Israel. But we don't like say, take newspaper headlines and say, oh, this newspaper headline fulfills chapter 17 of Revelation. I mean, we just tend to shy away from that. But again, it definitely could develop into something mini apocalyptic. I don't think we're at the end of the world, because one reason for that is that the Orthodox have this view, and I think all the even Catholics, some of them share this view. I don't know about evangelicals, but there is a belief that eventually the Jews will convert to Christianity, and if they do, and when they do, that is believed to be one of the signs of the end of the world. So that doesn't look like it's happening anytime soon. So, if orthodoxy is true, I mean, yeah, we got a while before any of the Jews care about Christianity.
Now you have a bunch of Christian Zionists out there, and listen, I'm cool with everybody. Um, do you have any thoughts on kind of like the actions of Netanyahu in that kind of thinking? Like to me, it's just kind of crazy that there's people that believe this is all part of a plan, and then we see a bunch of and I don't know your opinion on October 6th, but we're just gonna, for the sake of the discussion, go maybe it was a false flag, right? Just for the discussion of it.
I think it was allowed to happen.
Okay. So, and how that plays into this kind of belief system. Like it's just weird to me. I don't know why. And like I'm gonna be honest with you, I struggle a lot with as I become a Christian. And I mean, I believe in the teachings of Jesus. Okay. I know this, some people are gonna love this part of the conversation, some people are gonna hate it. Um, but there just seems like a lot of chaos in the Abrahamic religions to me. And it makes me hard to figure out what is right and what is wrong.
Well, from the Orthodox perspective, first point, no, we don't at all believe in Christian Zionism. So, and neither does the traditional Roman Catholic position. So, Orthodox and Catholic agree, and even classical Protestantism doesn't believe in that. Really, only a small, more recent movement of evangelicals is where we get this idea of Christian Zionism from. And I don't know if we've talked about, we might have done a podcast, can't remember where we talked about this, but like we would agree that this is really something that the British Empire, Oxford University, the Rothschild elite foisted upon the West through the Scofield Study Bible, through setting up these educational facilities that pushed Christian Zionism around the turn of the century in America. So it has nothing to do with historic Christianity. It's a very late 1800s from John Nelson Darby and some other figures who split from the Church of England, created their own kind of Protestant movement. Believe it or not, Aleister Crowley was actually raised in the Plymouth Brethren. So all of the Christian Zionism that we get comes out of the Plymouth Brethren movement, which was this weird British faction that was fostered by very wealthy elite people. They created their own study Bible. It's still sold in America today by Oxford University, the Scofield Study Bible. And that's what convinced a lot of Americans, get this, right before the establishment of the nation state of Israel, that American Christians should support this new created nation state. But as you know, there's Torah observant Jews. They don't accept this as a valid state of Israel. They see it as a really just a totally geopolitical thing. The British Empire, Rothschilds admittedly behind the Balfour Declaration. So I think it's totally an imperial creation, and it was intended originally to be one of the outposts of the British Empire for controlling the Middle East. The British Empire and their spies, they divided up the Middle East. I was going to talk about some of those characters like T.E. Lawrence.
Yeah, let's get into it.
St. John Philby. Those are famous British spies. They carved up the Middle East. So a lot of the Middle East that we have today, after what's called the Sykes-Picot Agreement with France and the UK, after the Ottoman Empire fell, like they just divided it up according to what the British Empire wanted to control that region according to imperialism. And as you know, as you move up into to shift away from the theological stuff, as you get into the early stages of the nation state of Israel, it was the Irgun, that gang, the Stern gang, that became the first sort of almost rebellious anti-British imperial group. They bombed the King David Hotel. They killed Jews and British ambassadors. They wanted to overthrow British rule and to be sort of independent. Same time, the Cold War was happening. The Soviets also wanted to utilize the nation state of Israel. Israel sort of eventually just swung towards being in line with the West, but they didn't want to be under British rule. So that's how you get this sort of the early stages of, I think, the Israeli military were like these people who were part of the Stern gang, the Irgun. They were basically terrorists. So
yes, dude,
that's where you get the origin of those people. Excuse me, for the military there. But it gets really complex because Britain was also screwing over Jews too. So it's not all one-sided. Like Britain wanted to give the impression that they were going to create this homeland for Jews, which, and I understand that was unfair to the existing Palestinian people that were there, right? So there was this idea that they all be led there. The British Empire aided Hitler. Hitler was also through. Have you heard of that secret agreement that Hitler had
Yeah.
with the Zionists for the nation
Yes.
state of Israel,
Yes.
the Havara agreement?
Yes. Nobody ever talks about that.
Yeah. So again, you know, people think that you're like a goofy guy, but I always find that like Sam like knows all of this history. Like I think you're way smarter than you kind of. I'm not saying you're dumb, but I'm saying
I get it, dude.
You play like you're like a super just goofy comedy guy, but I think you're like really, really sharp on this stuff because I listen to your podcast regularly. But anyway, I mean, I'm rambling, but you get the idea. So basically, look, it was there was this plan for imperial geopolitics, carve up the Middle East. Israel would be an outpost. Israel ends up kind of being not under the British Empire anymore. They get to be very powerful. People debate whether Israel controls the U.S. policy, whether is the dog wagging the tail or is the tail wagging the dog. There's a deep relationship there. I think the U.S. still tries to play both sides of conflicts. Obviously, it always tends to side towards Israel, but they will still fund Iran and give them a lot of money. The Democrats are big on that. So it's hard to know exactly like to what degree. I think it's a matter of degrees, right? Because they'll send $8 billion to Iran, but then they'll send however dozens more billions to Israel. So the U.S. tries to play both sides to placate the masses. Obviously, AIPAC has a huge role in influencing American policy. I don't know. I'm rambling. It's super.
No, but I love all of it, and you're nailing all some pretty much some of my favorite topics to talk about. I really there's moments where you hear like a bit of data and you're just like, wow, that's kind of an interesting piece of the puzzle that I didn't know. And when Queen Elizabeth, when she was alive, she was bragging about how she was like a relative of Muhammad. And that just blew my mind. Like, because you always knew everybody was related, but to that level, it is shocking. So then you get into, I've seen the debates between Muslims and Christians and all of that stuff. But the role of the British government and British intelligence in the formation of Islam, and this is nothing against people who are Islamic, I mean, everybody has their beliefs. We're just, data and what should be facts shouldn't have hurt. We don't worry about people's feelings when we discuss this stuff. That these are statistics that we should just be able to discuss without having emotional reactions to them. And that's an interesting data point to me that the Queen Elizabeth, who was like that, I think is way more powerful than we're led to believe, has a like close tie to the person who formed one of the Abrahamic religions. Like, what is your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, Charles says the same thing about Dracula. He says, I'm descended from Dracula, the Impaler. I don't actually think that Vlad the Impaler was like this monster like a lot of people think. I think he was just basically a medieval Catholic and almost kind of Orthodox dude who was trying to defend against Islam. He might have been brutal in the way that he fought, but dude, everybody in the Middle Ages was freaking brutal, dude. They're all like putting heads on poles. I mean, that's just the Middle Ages. I don't think he was uniquely somehow like out of accord with the Middle Ages brutality. But so when it comes to like her saying that, I mean, there's this weird relationship that the British elites have always had, both to Judaism and to Islam. And I think the explanation for that is that they, for one, amongst the British elite, have always had some that were Arab files, and then they've had some that leaned more towards Judaism, and that's because the Rothschilds obviously have played a key role in the British power structure. Obviously, they're the big power behind Zionism and the formation of the modern nation state of Israel. But you had a lot of British elites too, according to Quigley, a century ago, that were rabidly you have some of them even becoming Muslim. So I think both things are going on. And one explanation beyond
One explanation
beyond that is imperial geopolitics. If you run an empire, you want to try to manage and control all of these different ideas and tribes and groups. And one way to do that is, for example, in the case of like Charles has had a lot of phases where like he's been into Sufism. He was inducted into a Sufi order, which is a mystical Islam. He's expressed interest in Orthodox Christianity. You see him holding icons of Orthodox saints. He's talked about Catholicism at one point. So, I mean, I think what politicians and kings and elites do is they kind of try to play like they're all the positions because that plays well for audiences. So who knows what they really believe? I think they really believe in power, managing an empire that has a massive amount of worldviews and religious views. And they probably want to play all sides of that. You know what I mean? And if you go back to like the beginning of British intelligence doing a lot of these operations to control the Middle East, for example, St. John Philby, he's the father of Kim Philby, who's the most famous British turncoat who became a Soviet. This is the famous Cambridge spy ring. They made that movie with Gary Oldman, Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. That's loosely based on the famous Cambridge spy ring. They were all Skittles men that were compromised by the KGB, and they ended up going to Russia during the Soviet period.
That's so crazy.
They defected from England. But Kim Philby was the son of the most famous earlier generation British spy, St. John Philby, who basically went to the Middle East, became a sheikh. And now, did he really believe Islam, or was he doing this for British intelligence? I mean, he's a known British intelligence operative, right? But he goes and basically sets up Saudi Arabia. So where we get Saudi Arabia today is the British imperial espionage machinations of St. John Philby, who becomes Sheikh. His name was Sheikh Abdullah something. So he converted out of Anglicanism or whatever and becomes a Muslim sheikh. But this is where you get the British, the Saudi kingdom today. Now there's a movie.
It is so crazy, bro. Have you seen? So crazy.
Isn't that wild? Have you ever seen the movie Lawrence of Arabia?
Yeah.
Yeah, that guy, right? So Peter O'Toole's playing T.E. Lawrence, who's like another like a gay British spy dude who goes and he does the same thing as St. John Philby. He's just basically carving up the Middle East, taking all these tribes and turning them into British created nation states to rule. Now, eventually, obviously, the British Empire wanes and kind of dies out. Then you get the Pax Americana taking over. America just kind of basically takes over the same model. And then working together with British spies, they still kind of run this giant former British Empire, but these are the guys that set this up. You watch movies like Lawrence of Arabia and you see that.
That's incredible, dude.